And welcome to my next franchise review. Yes, indeed, you read the title right. Today I'll be reviewing the first Resident Evil movie released in... Hold up. The first Resident Evil movie released in 2002. So, my relationship with the Resident Evil movies. First off, hang on, let me... Damn it. Okay, there we go. And by the way, yes, I do have my computer on over here, but I'm only going to use it to look at some notes for the production of the film and some little knickknacks. My relationship with the Resident Evil movies. First off, I have been a Resident Evil fan for a very, very long time. I think it's close to about 17 years now. I think I've said this before, but I can't remember if I have, so I'll just reiterate it quickly. Some of my earliest memories from when I was a child were of me having the ever-living shit scared out of me by the very first Resident Evil game, the original version of the first Resident Evil game on the PS2. The woman who my dad was dating at the time, we lived with her, and her son was a huge Resident Evil fan. He had the first 3 games for the PlayStation. He would play them all the time. And I would always have the ever-living shit scared out of me, specifically by 1 and 3. I don't remember too much from the second game, but it was 1, especially 1 and 3, that scared the living crap out of me. And then I remember seeing the first movie on TV when it first came out, and that movie didn't really scare me because I only watched like a couple scenes of it when I was really young, so I don't really remember much. I didn't remember much of it till about 10 years later when I was about either 12 or 13, maybe even 14 years old, when we had a really bad snowstorm. A really bad snowstorm here. So bad to the point me, my dad, and my stepmom, or not my stepmom, me and my mom and my stepdad, we were almost trapped inside our own house, because it would snow, then we'd get some freezing rain, and then that would freeze over, then it would snow again, and then it would freezing rain again, then it would snow over. So we had like this thick layer of snow and ice on the ground, so we couldn't drive anywhere. And I remember before it snowed, this was back in the days when Blockbuster was still around. God, I miss Blockbuster so much. We had rented a few movies from Blockbuster before the snow hit, and one of them happened to be the first Resident Evil. Now, I will tell my history with Resident Evil Apocalypse in more detail when I review that. But I will say that I saw Resident Evil Apocalypse first, in full, and then I saw the first film in full, while the snow was going around, and we were, I was out of school for like 4 days. This happened during Christmas break, and it leaked into, the school days. So I remember rewatching this movie quite a few times while we were trapped inside inside our house because of the snow, and I watched the crap out of this movie, which is why I have so much nostalgia for this movie. And I've been a fan of the Resident Evil movies for a long time as well. In fact, I might just go as far to say that I like the movies a little more than the games. Don't get me wrong, the Resident Evil games are great, even though there are some bad ones. There are some bad ones, but I do like the game series overall, and I also do like the... Hang on. There we go. Damn it. There we go, that's better. I also do like the 3 animated Resident Evil movies, which are in continuity with the games, even though they really do feel like well, no. the third movie just feels like an in between side story, but they're still entertaining. Um, but if somebody was to force my hand and pick the games or the movies, I would honestly have to pick the movies. And I'm not saying that just because I'm not much of a gamer. I do prefer movies to video games, but I legitimately do prefer the Resident Evil games or Resident Evil movies to the games. I also have a lot of nostalgia for the first animated Resident Evil movie for that same reason. It's because we were trapped. Actually, no, I think it was a different snowstorm, but it was a similar situation. We were trapped inside our house because of a snowstorm, and I remember watching Resident Evil Degeneration on YouTube, and I remember really liking the film because of it. But I'll go into a little more detail with that when I review Resident Evil Degeneration. But I just want to get my backstory for Resident Evil out of the way. The first Resident Evil movie. And upon this most recent rewatching, I kind of have to say the movie hasn't held up, unfortunately, as much as I hoped. I'm gonna go on a record and say that this is probably my least favorite of the 6 films. It's kind of tied with 5 and 6. But I think for the moment, I'm going to say the first Resident Evil movie is my least favorite of the series. However, with me saying that, there are still a lot of good things about this movie. I do still enjoy this film. And I will quit bullshit and I will get into the plot. Okay. The movie begins with an employee of the Umbrella Corporation, or seemingly an employee of the Umbrella Corporation, in a hazmat suit, putting. I'm just gonna spoil the shit out of this plot. I'm not gonna act sort of, but so yeah, major spoilers. I'm not gonna act like I'm watching or describing this plot for the first time. But an employee of the Umbrella Corporation. For those who don't know, the Umbrella Corporation is a massive mega pharmaceutical company that has their hands in pretty much everything. Everything that exists. You know, they range from real estate, stock market stuff, manufacturing engines, engineering, warehouses, but their main thing is pharmaceutical stuff. And they're I think it stated at the beginning of the film, 9 out of 10 homes throughout the world have at least some type of umbrella product. And the main base for Umbrella is known as the Hive, which is a giant underground laboratory 2,500 feet below the Earth's surface next to the fictional Raccoon City. And inside the Hive, there's an Umbrella Corp employee, in a hazmat suit, placing vials of a green and blue fluid inside like a cold storage airtight sealed canister. This employee leaves and tosses a vial of the blue liquid, which is the T-virus. It shatters on the floor, and the T-virus escapes into the air conditioning system, becoming an airborne strain. And the artificial intelligence system of the Hive, known as the Red Queen, sees this and decides to kill all 500 scientists and employees inside the Hive in various ways, by cutting out elevators so they crash and kill, flooding a sealed room, which I have to call bullshit on real quick. There's no way in hell the entire sealed room would have filled up with water, because there's still oxygen in there. Where's the oxygen gonna go? It's gonna burst out the windows eventually. But whatever, movie logic. It kills a majority of the employees by turning on the halon system and poisoning everybody to death. A few hours later, 5 hours later, yeah, exactly. A woman whose name is Alice wakes up in her shower, and it's clear that she something is up with her memory. because she's looking around with this completely lost expression on her face. And she gets dressed, obviously, in a really skimpy red dress with awesome black knee-high boots. And just looks around this big-ass mansion that she's in. She steps outside, she says hello, and scares off a whole bunch of crows. She is then pulled inside the mansion by a man named Matt, he claims to be a cop, but later in the film it's revealed that he had a false ID, which is a massive felony. Anyway, and then right after Matt pulls her in, some special operatives, soldiers, break through the windows of the mansion, handcuff Matt, and then the leader of the group goes up to Alice and says, "Report. I want your report, soldier." But Alice is just completely lost and says, "I don't know what you're talking about." Then it's revealed that the mansion's defense systems have been activated, and a nerve gas was released inside the mansion, which rendered Alice unconscious, and one of the side effects is acute memory loss, which it can range from up to an hour to a day or even a week. It's completely subjective. The group takes Matt and Alice to the entrance of a train system to get into the hive, and that's where they discover a third man there who suffered from the effects of this nerve gas, whose name is Spencer. I'm going to call him Spence. And this team, plus Alice, Matt, and Spence, breach into the hive, and their mission is to shut down the Red Queen and figure out what happened inside the hive and see if there are any survivors. The group makes it to the Red Queen's mainframe chamber to basically get to her brain and shut her down completely. But to do that, right before that happens, let's see. 4 of this team of soldiers are killed when they are trapped inside the laser room. Everybody, any fan of this movie is going to know what that is. It's a narrow corridor which has a multi-purpose laser system, which cuts through practically anything. One guy gets his hand and top of his head cut off. One guy gets cut completely in half. The medic of the team, she gets decapitated, and the leader of the group, he literally gets grid sliced when it starts out as a thin laser, but as it comes down the hallway, it morphs into like a big tic-tac-toe board and slices him literally into pieces. Though this leads to a flaw that I will state later when I get to the cons of the film. But I'll just say this movie has a lot of continuity errors. So Alice and the main tech guy, Kaplan, go into the Red Queen's mainframe chamber and deliver the EMP charge, which is what they what they were going to use to shut her down. They delivered the EMP charge and fry her system, shutting down the entire electrical grid of the hive and unlocking all the doors. Back inside, what is the big pardon if you hear voices too, there are people here. Back inside a big containment chamber where Matt and Rain, played by Michelle Rodriguez, really, really underrated role for her, and kind of her sort of fuck buddy, it's implied, JD, hears some clattering around, and they stumble around, and they find a survivor, seemingly. Rain goes up to her, and turns out she's a zombie, and bites her hand. JD tries to reason with this zombie, and shoots it 5 times, but then Rain blows it away with her machine gun, but the body quickly disappears soon after. The remaining Kaplan, Spence, and Alice show up back in the containment chamber, and that's when the rest of the zombies show up, which had been let out when all the doors had been unlocked. The group gets into a fight, sort of, tries to fight off the zombies, but since they're not shooting them in the head, they're too stupid to figure out, maybe we should shoot them in the head. They quickly run out of ammo for their automated weapons, and they keep trying to fight them off, but they just keep coming. JD is swarmed by a horde of zombies and seemingly bitten to shreds. Rain is bitten once again. A monster inside one of the containment chambers, which is the movie's only liquor, one of my favorite Resident Evil monsters, breaks free, and the group splits up. Half of it, actually most of it, goes into the Red Queen's main chamber, and Alice and Kaplan go off throughout the hive looking for stuff. Matt goes his way, Alice goes her way. Alice has her first memory flash. Actually, no, her first big memory flash when she takes out a zombie when she realizes she has incredible hand-to-hand combat techniques, which Milla Jovovich, who plays Alice, she really does have phenomenal martial arts skills. I think she's trained in kickboxing, karate, taekwondo, and judo and jiu-jitsu. I could be wrong, but I do think that's in her roster. She kills a whole bunch of zombie dogs, which are some more of my favorite Resident Evil monsters. Saves Matt from being killed by his zombified sister, and this is when Alice has another flashback, realizing that she had spoken to Lisa, that's her name, Matt's sister, spoken to Lisa, saying she was Lisa's operative inside the hive. Turns out Matt was some kind of environmentalist who was looking to bring Umbrella down. And this is when we find out that Umbrella gets most of its money. Well, it said that at the beginning of the film, but this is when we discover what kind of research that Umbrella does, which is illegal genetic and viral experimentation. Learning, basically, it's like a super version of the CDC. They create viruses and try to figure out how to use them for biological warfare, which is really fucking stupid. Have you not seen The Stand? Anyway, that's actually kind of a bit of a flaw that I have with this entire film series is, why is Umbrella, this mega corporation, continuing to create more of the problem? They continue to create the T-virus. Why? Oh, actually, no. It is revealed why in the final film, in a really kind of cliche reason, though admittedly I do kind of agree with why they do it. I just kind of think it could have been executed better. But anyway, that's for Resident Evil 6. Alice and Matt reunite with the rest of the group, and they reactivate the Red Queen to see if they could figure out a way out of the hive, because they're on a time limit. The hive will be sealed shut after, I think it's like 2 hours once they breach the hive, and at this point in the film they have a little less than an hour to make it there. So they reactivate the main queen, and they reactivate the Red Queen, and she gives them a path through the hive's sewer systems, but they again encounter another group of zombies, and they hop up on top of some ceiling pipes, but Rain is bitten twice more. Poor Rain. And when they're almost about to enter some air ducts, the pipes snap. Alice is nearly swarmed, but she joins Matt, Spence, and Rain, and Kaplan decides to stay behind and try to distract the zombies. And this is actually kind of the last time that we see the group of zombies in the film. So they reach the main deck of the hive, and they start to head towards the train so they can get out of the hive. And this is where Alice recovers most of her memory, and when she realizes there is a This is what. Sorry, I was waking up my computer. This is when Alice recovers most of her memory and realizes that there is a cure to the T virus, which is the antivirus. Blue for the T virus, the blue liquid for the T virus, and green liquid for the antivirus. Which I do like that this company was smart enough to create a cure for this extremely volatile substance. But even then, it still only does so much. Anyway, she goes inside one area of the hive, which is where that employee at the beginning was putting stuff into, and discovers that the antivirus is gone. And this is when Spence... Ooh, we got one watcher. This is when Spence recovers all of his memory, and it turns out he's a backstabbing piece of shit. He recorded all of Alice's meetings with Lisa, because it turned out Alice was the head of security for the hive, and she was trying to stop Umbrella from what they were doing. So she was Lisa's contact inside the hive. And it turns out Spence was also the one who released the T virus inside the hive. So he's the one who really started this whole series. And so he recovers all of his memory, swipes Alice's gun, and steals away to the train. He is bitten by a zombie in the process. Makes it there, but he is killed by the liquor. And this is when the Red Queen tells them that, they ask, what the hell is this thing? Referring to the liquor. And it turns out that if something is if something living, like if the T virus is injected to living tissue, it'll cause uncontrollable mutation. Which this is really, really volatile stuff. The Red Queen refuses to let Alice, Matt, and Rain leave because Rain is severely infected and is quite literally on the last legs of her life. The liquor shows up and tries and almost breaks into this sealed room, but Kaplan shows up, deciding to completely fry the Red Queen's main system, unlocking all the doors because Spence had locked them inside this sealed room. Right as the liquor shows up, they seal it inside that sealed room once again, but it escapes. They make it to the train. They recover the antivirus. Alice kills Spence, and they make it onto the train. They start to head towards the opening of the hive. However, the liquor catches up to them right after Alice and Matt deliver the antivirus to Kaplan and Rain. Kaplan is snatched by the liquor and presumably killed. Actually, no, he is killed. It's pretty obvious. And Matt and Alice get into a short fight with the liquor as it boards the train. However, Rain unfortunately turns into a zombie. She was just way too far gone. She was bitten 4 times, so the first time I saw this movie, I just knew she was going to become a zombie. She was bitten 4 fucking times. Went at least an hour and a half without being remotely treated for the infection, so I knew she was going to become a zombie. Matt kills Rain, and they kill the liquor by opening up trap doors underneath the train and letting the liquor be electrocuted and set on fire on the electric rails of the train. They make it to the opening. They make it inside the doors just as they're about to be sealed. However, it turns out Matt was also became infected when the liquor showed up and scratched the shit out of his forearm. However, Umbrella scientists show up right before as Alice is about to administer the antivirus. I don't think it would have worked. But anyway, the Umbrella scientists capture Matt and capture Alice. They do some experimentation on Alice and Matt. We don't really know what the fate of Matt is until the next film. But Alice wakes up, I think it's at least a month, maybe 2 later, inside the Raccoon City Umbrella Corporation, or facility. Wakes up, picks a lock inside a room that she's in, recovers a white doctor's cloak, and goes into the streets of Raccoon City, finding it completely desolate and completely destroyed, like all hell had broken loose. And the film ends with her recovering a shotgun from a police car, and the movie ends with, honestly, it's a really good ending, with a really long pan camera shot that reveals us the true destruction of Raccoon City, and then just cuts to black. Great ending. So how about this plot? Well, it's a really, really good plot. It reminds me a lot of, or not really a lot, but it is kind of similar to Alien, the original Alien. This movie was directed by Paul W.S. Anderson, who I stated also directed Alien vs. Predator. And in the documentary on the making of Alien vs. Predator, he stated that he went to go see it when he was a young kid, and it scared the living shit out of him. He stated he's a very big fan of the original Alien. And this movie he kind of made as a bit of an homage to Alien. And this plot definitely shows. It's very well thought out. It's very well constructed. Though my issue with it is that it doesn't quite feel like a Resident Evil movie. Well, it does because the Umbrella Corporation is mentioned, the T-Virus is mentioned, and we see the liquor. But outside of that, this could have just been a standard cat and mouse zombie movie, which it kind of is. It just so happens to also be a Resident Evil movie. And by the way, this series is not in canon with the Resident Evil games. There are some people who there's a couple people out there who I've heard try to say that they are. No, they're not. They loosely draw elements from this movie in particular. Let's see what. This movie borrows elements from Resident Evil 1 and 2. Honestly, I only see elements from Resident Evil 2 here. Maybe the only element from Resident Evil 1 is that the first game was kind of like it was in a really claustrophobic environment. This movie is certainly as well. But in the first Resident Evil game, it was a mansion, which is mentioned here, but that's only seen at the beginning and end of the film. Whereas here, it's mostly an underground laboratory, and obviously you can't really escape from that. But you can, but it's very difficult. So with all that said, let's get into the pros of Resident Evil. There's actually quite a bit. The movie is overall very decently paced. The first half, in particularly the first 40 minutes of the film, it's very, very well paced. It moves along at a slightly fast pace. You're never really bored. There's kind of a lot of world building there too, and there's a lot of establishing stuff. But it's totally convincing, and it just draws you in. At first it kind of feels also like it's kind of like a standard military rogue AI system type film. There's never really any. We don't see any monsters till about 45 minutes into the film, and there's a small part of me that kind of thinks that the first half of the film is better than the second. But in the second half of the movie, they fight zombies and monsters and such. That's when it becomes more of a horror film. So that's good. So overall, the pacing is very good, and the second half of the movie. There are a couple slow bits, but I don't really think that's a bad thing. That's just because the movie slows down so it can fill the viewers in on what exactly happened, because this movie also does have some mystery movie elements to it, and they're handled quite well, if you ask me. The characters in this movie, the main characters, the side characters, they're just cannon fodder. To be killed off, but the main characters, particularly Spence, Matt, Rain, and especially Alice, they're all very well done. Spence is probably the least developed of the main four human characters. He starts out kind of just as a helpful guy, but once he regains his memory, he kind of becomes a douchebag villain at the very last minute, and it's a shame that. It's a bit of a shame that he dies in this movie. I kind of would like to see him die in at least the third film. But I kind of doubt that they had the 6-movie franchise in mind when they made this, because this movie had a budget of $33 million dollars, and it made $103 million dollars worldwide. So it definitely was a box office hit. But I kind of tend to doubt that Paul W.S. Anderson had 6 movies in mind. I'm sure he had at least 2. But anyway, Spence is not bad, but I just kind of think he's a bit of a missed opportunity. Like I say, he could have been in at least 1, 2, or maybe even 3 movies. Matt is almost tied with Spence in being a missed opportunity. I would have liked to see him around. Well, technically we do see him in 1 and 2, but in 2 he becomes the Nemesis. I would have liked to see him become Nemesis in 3, but still, it's kind of a shame that he doesn't stay in human form in the second movie. But here he still is good. He's a good ally for Alice, and he's quick on his feet, and he's a quick learner, or not quick learner. He's a quick thinker, and he's a helpful character, and he's not dumb. He's really not dumb. So he's great. Rain, played by Michelle Rodriguez, again, like I said, she's a badass. She is a no-nonsense badass. It's just kind of a shame that toward the end of the film, she just almost becomes before she becomes a zombie, she practically is a zombie. She's limping around and staggering around. She has really sunken eyes. Great makeup. I'll get into that in just a second when I talk special effects, but great makeup for her. And her acting is really, really good, too. And again, her character is kind of a missed opportunity, but what they do for her is kind of okay in Resident Evil 5, but she's just demoted to a villain, which I think is kind of a shame because I love Rain in this film. She's a no-nonsense badass. But still, what we have for Rain in this movie is decent. And let's get to Alice. Oh my god. I'm just going to go on a record and say that Alice is one of my absolute favorite action heroes in any movie franchise of all time. I could see her giving, except for the Terminator, I could see her giving a lot of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone's action characters a big run for their money. Alice is a complete and total badass. But in this movie, it's very prototypical. She still is a no-nonsense badass in this movie. She knows how to. She's an expert hand-to-hand competent. She can kill zombies with her bare hands, which is awesome. But and she's also really good with the gun. She's good with the fire axe. She's good at thinking on her feet because when she's fighting the licker, there's a whole bunch of pipes, like loose pipes up above her, and she uses one pipe to snag the licker's tongue and another one to impale the licker's tongue and keep it in place. She knows how to think on her feet, and she still is a badass. However, her performance in this movie is I've always found amnesiac characters to be kind of blandly written, and they're also their character arcs are very, very formulaic. Granted, I haven't seen that many movies or TV shows. The 2 that come to mind is this Resident Evil movie, is the first Resident Evil film, and Kamen Rider, actually no, 3, and Kamen Rider Agito and Kamen Rider Decade. Those are the 2 most prominent Kamen Rider shows that have amnesiac characters. I think there's at least one more, but Agito and Decade are the 2 most famous Kamen Rider examples where the main character is an amnesiac. And their character arcs are always predictable, because at some point you just know that they're going to regain their memories, then they're just going to become no-nonsense badasses once again. Which Alice definitely goes through that here in this film. And they're always written as being innocent. Like, at first they're just completely innocent and completely lost to their surroundings. They just don't know what the hell is going on. But here, it's not badly written. Nowadays it is kind of predictable. I definitely do think that I wouldn't say this is Alice's weakest performance, but I think it's the one where she has the least to do. That's just because she's an amnesiac and she's just now discovering her abilities. And this is also before she becomes infected with the T virus, which causes her to be superhuman. So it is very prototypical, but it's still not bad. The acting too is overall very good as well. Like I said, Alice does good. Michelle Rodriguez does good. Spence is sort of okay. He sort of has this bland expression on his face throughout a lot of the film, but he still does good. Matt does really good too. And the rest of the supporting characters, they, even though they're just cannon fodder, they still do their jobs all right. This movie has a really good soundtrack too. It's certainly there's no soundtrack taken from the Resident Evil games, at least not that I know of. I don't. God damn, my leg itches. To my knowledge, I don't believe that there was any Resident Evil soundtracks from the games put inside the films. But the soundtrack for this movie is very good. It's creepy and ominous when it needs to be. It's action packed and gets your blood going during the action scenes. And the track that they play at the very end of the film, when we see the destruction of Raccoon City, that's what makes the ending to this movie so good, if you ask me. It's part one of two. But I'll get to that when I get to the ending. But the music overall is very good. It's not amazing or anything, but it is a good soundtrack. The use of suspense in this movie is also very good as well. There's not a whole lot of it, but there's mainly just a lot of suspense in that doesn't make sense. A lot of this movie's suspense is in the first half when you don't really know when a zombie or a monster is going to pop out, which is very reminiscent of the first Resident Evil game. So maybe that's another element they took. For a lot of the first half of the first Resident Evil game, you don't really encounter a whole lot of monsters. Which isn't a bad thing. Don't get me wrong, but it made the suspense all that much more better because you don't know if a zombie is going to pop out of the next corner, and because this movie has a little bit of alien in it, it makes you feel claustrophobic because you're trapped inside this metal cage. You're not in space; you're deep underground, but nobody can hear you scream. Well, technically they could, but only people inside of the hive could hear you scream. But you know what I mean. You're trapped inside a metal cage, and that level of claustrophobia and suspense creeps up your spine and really makes you nervous. There's not really that much suspense in the second half of the film. Actually, no, I would probably go as far to say there's none at all, except maybe in the scene where Alice fights the dogs. But after that, the movie just doesn't really have any suspense. But what sort of little we have here is really well done. And the last thing, actually no, second to last thing I want to say is the special effects are really, really, really good. The practical special effects. I'll get to the CG stuff in a minute. But the practical special effects in this movie are really, really well done. The zombie makeup is pretty convincing. It's very minimalist, but it makes sense because these are fresh corpses. So we see a lot of kind of sunken, darker eyes. We see some wounds. We see blacker. We see blackish, decayed matter teeth. We see nasty, veiny looking eyes. Pale skin, pale, clammy skin. Makeup effects in this movie are really, really good. And overall, the zombie makeup is pretty well done. The practical effects for the liquor, what kind of little of it that you do see, because there are some shots in this movie where you see it's a full-on animatronic puppet. Those look really good. It actually looks organic. It looks like a real living creature. It's just kind of a shame they don't use that much of it. And the gore effects are also pretty good too. Again, kind of what little of it we do see. There's a lot of quick shots when the liquor mutates. I forgot to mention this. When the liquor kills Spence, it mutates from the image of it that we see in the game. The kind of humanoid-esque looking frog lizard type thing with the brain head and the human face and the long tongue. And then when it feeds on Spence, it mutates into like a mutated dog-looking type thing, which is twice its size. So it barely looks like the liquor at all. But the only thing that makes it a liquor is that it does have a long tongue. But there's a lot of quick shots where we see it mutate, where its flesh is stretching and flipping and morphing. Those look good. And when the liquor kills Spence, there's a crap ton of blood all over the place, which I do think actually was there. And Spence actually looks like he was torn apart when he turns into a zombie, and when we see his corpse. The gore effects are really good, though again they're kind of minimalist, and we don't really see that much. This movie is really not that gory. I mean, compare it to something like Scott's Guide to the Zombie Apocalypse or Shaun of the Dead. Those movies are quite gory. This movie doesn't really. This movie almost borders on being tame. It's not. There still is some. There's quite a few acts of violence, and there's a lot of swearing here. But compared to a lot of other zombie movies, this movie is not like nothing mind blowing. But still, the special effects are pretty good. Oh, and the production values are also really good too. Like the hive looks like it's completely made out of metal. It looks futuristic, but it also still looks a little modern. It really does look great, and it adds to the level of claustrophobia that you feel. Again, reminiscent of the original Alien. And like I said, the ending to this movie is really, really, really good. Part one of it is because of the music. It just kind of makes you feel like you're just so royally butt-fucked doomed. It just makes you feel like, oh God, what the fuck am I gonna do? And also, due to the fact that it's a really wide shot of all the rampant destruction that we see throughout Raccoon City. It's a combination of seeing all that destruction and I think I can turn this off now. All that rampant destruction and also that music. It's a really, really good way to end a film. It's certainly better than the original ending that they had planned. If you buy this DVD, you can watch the alternate ending. And it kind of ends with the movie with Raccoon City not being overrun. It takes place 6 months later, with Alice still trying to find Matt. And at that point, I think that's the route where it would have become an action series a lot quicker. But I prefer this ending. It leads into the second movie very well as well. So let's get into the cons of Resident Evil, shall we? The CG effects in this movie are utterly abysmally bad. They look like PS1 graphics. I know that is a very, very common thing to say about early CG effects. Because like I said, this movie came out in 2002. CG was still a new thing newer thing at the time. And a lot of the CG effects in this movie are very, very prototypical. And they look obviously fake. They look like they look like PS1 graphics. I hate to say that because that's such a common phrase, but they really do look like PS1 graphics. It looks very cartoony. I think it looks its worst when they use CG to make a zombie look all deformed and fucked up. There's one or two shots where it looks kind of okay, but that's because they use really subtle CG to augment the zombie's face. But there's another one where the zombie had half of its face missing, and that one and one of its eyes missing, and that one clearly was augmented with CG, and it looks terrible. It looks almost cartoony. And when the liquor mutates, and the CG model for itself looks really cartoony. It honestly, there's one shot where it barely looks finished. The CG effects in this movie are really, really bad. The second con is there's really, really prototypical computer image scenes. This is something that's pretty iconic for the first and third film. It's kind of left out. Actually, no. The computer scenes they're kind of hard to explain. But the best way I can describe them, they're kind of like video game cutscenes. Where you see like a computer X-ray image of the hive, and via cameras somehow. And the human characters are represented by heat signatures, and those images look very, very prototypical. They get better as the series goes on. They also don't use as much of them. This movie uses a lot. So is Resident Evil Extinction. But here they look very, very prototypical, and they definitely do look like cutscenes straight out of a video game. But then again, that may just be the point. Con number 3 is this movie. This movie doesn't draw enough inspiration from the video games, if you ask me. You have the liquor, which I think was introduced in Resident Evil 2. I'm pretty sure it was. Correct me if I'm wrong. Any Resident Evil fans, correct me if I'm wrong. And of course, you have the zombies, and you have the Umbrella Corporation, and you have the T-Virus and the antivirus. Actually, I don't think the antivirus was a thing in the video games. I could be wrong again. I haven't studied Resident Evil game lore in a while, so correct me if I'm wrong. But it's not like a huge flaw. I mean, diehard Resident Evil fans will say that this is a big problem. But for me, I don't think it's that much of an issue, because I do like the fact that this movie tries to be more of an original thing. But I think this movie could have drawn just a little more inspiration. Like, we could have had a bigger variety of monsters for the commandos to fight, except for just zombies and one liquor. We could have had a couple mutated, and zombie dogs, but that's another form of zombies. But we could have had some mutated insect-like monsters for them to fight. Just a little bit of a bigger variety, just to show what type of shit Umbrella has already created at this point. And also, the last problem, this is probably the biggest problem outside of the terrible CG effects, is that this movie has quite a few continuity flubs. The biggest one being in the laser grid scene, when the commando leader is sliced and diced. When Alice goes inside this laser grid hallway, there's a shot where you can clearly see the carnage on the floor. You see the dude who was cut in half, you see the dude who had his hand and a little bit of his head cut off, and you see the chick who had her head cut off. You don't see any of the pieces. You don't see any of the pieces of the leader whatsoever. And there's a shot where you can see where those pieces would have been, and they're not there. They're not there at all, which is frustrating as hell. For somebody like me, I hate continuity errors in film. Like one continuity error that always comes to mind is in Beetlejuice. It's a really quick scene if you're not paying attention. There's a scene where Otho is walking through the house, figuring out what to knock down and what to remodel. There's a scene where he's wearing black tuxedo shoes. Then there's another quick scene where he's wearing red and white like tennis shoes. And then there's this scene right after is he's back to wearing his tuxedo shoes. Continuity flubs like that drive me utterly insane. And not seeing all the pieces of the sliced and diced dude drives me utterly insane too. That's like, dude, were you that fucking lazy? How could you forget to acknowledge something like that? They could have easily avoided it if they just didn't show, if they just tried to avoid not showing the carnage on the floor. I would have preferred if they did that over showing us what the hell happened. And also another continuity error is when during this scene, this may sound kind of trivial, but this kind of drove me nuts too. During the scene where Alice was fighting the dogs, there was one scene where she recovered a gun from the security guard, the zombie security guard she killed, and she was going through a door. There's a shot where the camera zooms in on the door to show the dog's POV. It's clearly clean, but then the shot right after that, when the dog is pawing at the door, there's a lot of blood. There's blood stains all over this door that were clearly not there just a second ago. And again, that may sound trivial, but that just drives me utterly insane. Continuity flubs like that. So I think the continuity flubs are probably this movie's biggest issue. So with all that said about the first Resident Evil movie, I still kind of stand by what I say. This is probably my least favorite of the series. But this movie is a very good start. It is an entertaining film. You could do a lot worse for video game movies, I could tell you that for damn sure. I really struggled on my rating to give this film. I struggled between a 6.5 and a 7. And ultimately, I did enjoy myself quite a bit watching this movie in this most recent rewatching. So I'm going to give this movie a 7 out of 10. It still is my least favorite, but it might be. I could change my opinion when I watch the rest of the series, but a 7 out of 10 is a good score. It's a good start to a really good, to a good series. I'm not going to say really good because the last two are pretty disappointing. But I do recommend it if you are a hardcore Resident Evil fan. And if you haven't seen this movie and you've seen Resident Evil movies, I definitely do recommend it there. So 7 out of 10. I recommend check it out. So post your comments down below. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. Share this video with your friends. Look forward to part 2 of this when I review probably my second favorite of the entire series. Ironically, in the second of the Resident Evil series. Resident Evil Apocalypse, released in 2004. Share this video with your friends, and as always, I will see you in the next video.